You know, for the Redbone community, for the Melungeon community, for these other communities, you see 1806 is a really important year. On one coast, you're being told you've got to leave or you're going to become enslaved again. Like, we don't want any free people of color here anymore. But that same year, 1806, something happens, some unprecedented agreement happens between two nations to create no man's land. Hi, it's so good to see you. Thank you so much for being with me here on my channel. I'm Danielle Romero, and here we talk about American identity and family stories. I have just loved this new format of us hanging out this way and kind of getting back into the focus on actual family stories. I think this is a really misunderstood topic. When I first went to Louisiana, I grew up in New York. When I first went to Louisiana to meet some of my family a couple years ago, I immediately had someone call me a Redbone, and I didn't know what that meant. I knew the band, Redbone, really great song, Come and Get Your Love, but I didn't know what it meant. And it's such a loaded phrase because it means something in the Black community. And that is tangentially related to the historical term Redbone. And we're going to get to that. We're going to talk about some of my Redbone family. And what's really interesting is that a lot of people in the South, whether you're Melungeon, whether you're Creole, whether you're a bunch of any other things, you very likely have these names in your tree. Some of the big ones that we're going to talk about in this video: Drake, CHAVEZ or CHAVEZ, GOINS or GOINS. It's the same family, a little bit different spelling. So many of them had a similar experience. I was talking to Miss Amy Cross, who is an amazing genealogist, and she was kind of talking me through parts of this side of my family tree. And she asked such an interesting question. I was showing her how this family looked like it had come from Virginia, and then they came all the way to Louisiana and Texas. They're kind of in no man's land. And she's like, well, you have to ask yourself, why did this ancestor, John Drake, why did he and his wife leave Virginia?
If you want to discover maybe why that happened, you need to know a whole lot more about John Aaron Drake. And in all honesty, children sometimes give you what you need too. So don't neglect the other children. And so that's where I would tell you to go, because I feel like there's a whole lot more you can do on him, because this to me is a fascinating story. If this were me, this is something that I would like to know more about as well. Why did they leave Virginia? Why did they wind up in Louisiana? And on this family line, this is where it happened.
I didn't have an answer. I didn't totally know. And I thought that is such a great starting point for this story. And what I love about it is it creates this triangulation between these communities. I think even the Lumbee community get folded into this, where you see that there is a connection. We share ancestors. But why are we so spread out? This is why. Because as I started tracing my Louisiana family, I was like, well, some of these people have been in Louisiana a long time. Some people came from Virginia and North Carolina. I was like, why would you do that? Like, there is so much more going on the coast for the most part. And why would you make that big trek? I mean, we're talking 1780s, early 1800s. This is a massive trek to make. And these aren't people with high social status necessarily. These are people who on census records were called mulatto, mulatto libre, a free mulatto, black, all kinds of things. And so at this point, I was like, well, what's happening here? And I came across something that was so surprising to me that I had missed it. Like, I was so surprised I had missed it. And I'm a big numbers person. Like, I don't know. You know, some people don't care about numbers. And I'm like, numbers are, you know, to me, the building blocks of the universe. So I'm like, when numbers show up a certain way, I pay attention. I don't know. It's just my weird thing. But there were two dates that came up over the course of this. Because my question was, well, why did they move? Well, let's go to Virginia. So in Virginia, one of my ancestors, his name was John Aaron Drake, and he was married to a woman who was born about the same time. Her name was Charity CHAVEZ or CHAVEZ. And these are last names that if you're from any of the communities I mentioned before, I'm sure that you know them or have them in your tree. And so both of these people were listed as mulatto, libre. These are free people of color. You know, that's a term you hear a lot in Louisiana. You see that a lot on my family records, free people of color. By the year 1806, now my family had already left by this point, but the screws were tightening. By the year 1806, Virginia had passed a law that said, basically, if you're not white, if you're mulatto or a free person of color, remember, that didn't just necessarily mean you're half black. That's not what that meant, but we'll get to that. Mulatto was a very complex term during that time. But basically by 1806, they said, you need to pack up your bags and get out of here or you can be enslaved, because they were looking to get rid of free people of color as a group. They didn't want that. They wanted things more binary. Like, we need to know that, you know, we have free white people and now we have enslaved black people. And so if you're kind of in the middle, well, that messes that up, doesn't it? It gets real messy. So they said, you got to get out of here. So that's by 1806. Well, I can only imagine how my family was feeling the years leading up to this. You know, things don't just happen overnight usually. There's usually a slow buildup. Now, originally, John Aaron Drake, he was actually born in Virginia. And some of the work that was doing on the Drake family, it seemed like they may actually have ties to some of the native tribes in Virginia, but I couldn't figure that out for sure. So if you've done that work, let me know. I'd love to see it. I mentioned 1806. I want to tell you what was happening on the other side of the country in 1806. And then I want to talk to you about what mulatto means at this point, because it doesn't mean the way we use it now, even though we really don't use it now, probably shouldn't. 1806. So we're saying Virginia. 1806, they're tightening the screws on mixed race people. Okay, well, in 1806, in the middle of the country, the United States and Spain are having a boundary dispute. Because at this point, there's territory that they can't decide or agree who owns what and where does the line go. So what they decide to do is they both agree to create a strip that no one owns. No man's land, the neutral strip. Well, this territory was in between Texas and Louisiana. And so you have this strip that's just turns into almost like a Wild West situation. No one's really monitoring it, at least for a while. And it's pretty free from most of the laws that are happening on the East Coast and coming down south. So this wasn't something that was like formally ratified, but it was respected by both governments. And so this neutral territory allowed mixed race families, like my families, like the Drakes and the Goinses, to come and kind of elevate their social status by not having to play ball with the social status, if that makes sense. It was not the same experience for people of mixed race. There was more freedom, and you could kind of be in a community of people who had experiences like you, or maybe had the same background as you, and it was a really unique opportunity. And so you have this dichotomy happening where in 1806, Virginia is like, well, we want all these guys out of here, while in 1806, there's this new opportunity opening up. And so you can see why so many people from these families, the Drakes, the Goinses, the CHAVEZes, leaving Virginia, leaving North Carolina, coming to what is now Texas and Louisiana, coming to that neutral strip. And this is where the official Redbone community sprouts up. So let's talk about mulatto now, because in Virginia, there was a definition for what mulatto meant, and it did not mean half white and half black. The 1705 Virginia law, and I want to read right from here, and Virginia's Acts of the Assembly, they had racial classifications that broadened to include anyone of indigenous ancestry or African ancestry as mulatto. They weren't, unless it was specifically designated, it wasn't. And so the primary identification for John Aaron Drake and Charity CHAVEZ was mulatto libre, a free mulatto, a free mixed race person. So they were able to, integrate so much more than in the Anglo-dominated colonies. So I want to tell you a little bit about Charity CHAVEZ's story. So she was listed in her mother's household in the 1767 tax records of Granville County, North Carolina. if you're researching these families, you know, this is like a big hit, right? You have the Lumbee over in that area now. And so even now you can start, if you had strings coming from all these places, you would see the strings coming down from Virginia to North Carolina, to South Carolina, and then over to Louisiana and Texas. And I have some theories about the Melungeon connection to this, but we'll get to that. And I actually have a document that I will put up about Charity that I found. And so she was a mulatto libre native of Virginia who married John Aaron Drake, mulatto libre of Elizabeth, Virginia. And then they had a son, this document says. His name was John Drake, which makes it really hard when you're doing family stuff. And he was called, this was literally his designation, Mulatto Libre Natural de Carolina. So free mulatto native of Carolina. And he married a woman named Rosalie Abshire or Abshire. So they were married in St. Martinsville, Louisiana in 1800. So then they have a child. And this is where the Goins family comes in. So they have a daughter named Seraphia, and she marries Jeremiah Goins. And the Goins family are, I feel like, the biggest family in the United States. I just had no idea how many there were. So they got married, and by 1834, they had moved into Texas during its Republic era, taking advantage of, at the time, Texas had looser social regulations on racial identity, and they allowed people of color to build new routes towards the frontier. Now, that would change. That would change after the Revolution. I have a video on that. I can link to that below. So Jeremiah Goins identified as Choctaw, but he was recorded in early Texas records as Negro, mulatto, even yellow. I don't know that one. I was just like, when I read it, like, I don't know. Again, it's crazy because we do white, black, you know, all these things, but like seeing yellow, you don't hear it a lot. And I think it was so jarring. That color designation was so jarring. I'm like, they should all be that jarring. Truly, but seeing yellow was pretty jarring. But it reflects the fluid and ambiguous labels that get placed on mixed race families. Before I keep going with the Goins family, I want to just talk about this connection that I'm just seeing between the Lumbee and the Melungeon and the Redbone, who are very often connected to Louisiana Creole families. And it just makes so much sense because I'm thinking, well, if people are coming over, leaving, fleeing Virginia because they have to, or they see the writing on the wall and they're going, where can you go? You can't go east. That's the ocean. Like, you have to go west. Did some of those people go into the mountains of Appalachia and they ended up creating kind of their own isolated communities and joining up with, you know, people who are already there, and you end up with Melungeon identity, Melungeon culture. Then some people are headed over even further west. They're going to the neutral territory, and these are the people who end up being called Redbone historically. And of course, that name, those things have changed over time. But a lot of those people, I think, have, like my family, married into Creole families, and you get this mixture. And of course, we have people who maybe stayed over there, and a lot of those people with these last names identify as Lumbee, and maybe other groups that I don't know about yet, so I'd love to hear about them from you. But it's just amazing to me because you just see how much power laws have on the future. It's incredible. And how important it is to understand the why behind your family moving. Like, why did your family leave Italy? Why did your family leave Ireland? Why did they leave Virginia? Why did they head over this direction? And maybe you have the very general idea, but it has been an absolute Easter egg hunt. It's been amazing to really delve in and try to figure out, okay, how do I, someone with Creole heritage, have a connection to these free people of color from the 1750s, 1760s, 1770s in what we now call Virginia, what we now call North Carolina. And it's amazing to see these migration patterns. And I think that is another thing. I know I have another video about this, but just the ancestry communities, even the MyHeritage communities, have been so helpful because it's not looking so much at like, well, what state was your family from? It's like you see these clusters of connectivity. And sometimes these clusters, we can't figure out why they're there, But if we go back and ask, well, why would people have left that area? What was happening at that time? You know, for the Redbone community, for the Melungeon community, for these other communities, you see 1806 is a really important year. On one coast, you're being told you've got to leave or you're going to become enslaved again. Like, we don't want any free people of color here anymore. But that same year, 1806, something happens, some unprecedented agreement happens between two nations to create no man's land. And it's just amazing. I love researching this because I think sometimes when we're doing our family story, it's like can be really overwhelming. Where you think, well, I'm not a genealogist. I can't figure all this stuff out. But if we overlay it with just the context of what was going on at that time, what was happening at that time, people's decisions make so much more sense. You know, this is, again, something very similar when I was researching my great-grandmother's story and saying, oh, why would you leave Louisiana in the 1930s after you married an Irish man and had kids? Well, I was like, it doesn't take too much digging to figure out why you might want to leave Louisiana in the 1930s as a person of color who was interracial marriage. You know, having that basic knowledge, it kind of just is an illumination for us of why did our ancestors do these things. You know, and I look at these ancestors and I just think they are so tough and brave and bold to just go to a place and like, this place doesn't even count as a state. Like, they're gonna go there, they're gonna bring their kids there, they're gonna raise their families there and create a community, the ability to have the agency to decide how you want to live your life. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And it's something I'm really proud to be from. If you would like to grab this awesome shirt that I made, it says, "Be kind to me. I was born in the 1900s. I'll leave that up on my channel, or on my website, excuse me, NewYorkToNashville.com. Let me know what you think. I want to do some more deep dives onto this. Otherwise, we'll talk soon.
Over the last 2 years, I've been telling the stories that often get ignored. But lately, I've been facing an uphill battle behind the scenes of each video. My videos are getting flagged by YouTube when all I'm doing is sharing real history. If these stories have ever resonated with you or given you a new perspective, grab some Be a Good Ancestor merch and help me keep this channel going. Check out NYTonashville.com.